This year sees the centenary of the First World War, which ran between 1914 and 1918 and mobilised over 70 million people, with a loss of life of over 9 million. I'd like to take this moment to reflect and look back. My grandfather fought in the First World War, but as a horticulturalist, I'd also like to know what positive impact plants, parks and gardens had during the First World War. But not only that, what effect they had after the First World War and what positive effect they're having on the armed forces of today. It's a journey of discovery, looking back over horticulture during the First World War. Mike Fitt, Chairman of the Royal Parks Guild, tells me how Britain's royal parks played their part during the First World War. So Mike, you've done a bit of research on what the royal parks were used for during the war, because it was an important resource really, wasn't it?
Incredible. I really have to thank my vice chairman, Dave and his wife, who spent hundreds of hours down at the National Archives researching the royal parks during World War I, and the things they found were quite amazing. I mean, would you imagine that H.G. Wells was conducting experiments in Richmond Park, preparing an aerial ropeway for the trenches, or where you're standing, the lake was drained in St James's Park, and it was a mini Whitehall, and all the government buildings were erected here because they didn't have enough room in the buildings behind us.
But parks up and down the country, not just the royal parks, all parks around, played a significant part in supporting the food effort.
So parks became in the vanguard of growing vegetables, food for the nation.
I also heard that outside the front of Buckingham Palace they were growing potatoes, is that right?
Would you believe it? Yes. They couldn't do it till they got the King's special permission. And then instead of geraniums, rose potatoes. There were allotments in all the royal parks.
Yeah.
And the government was so particular that we'd all know what to grow, that they instructed their park superintendents to nominate a person in each royal park to instruct the public.
What, to actually train people on how to grow?
On a model allotment, and there was even a catalogue that the man had to refer to describe to the public what they should be growing. And so now you're standing in one of those recreated allotments with some of the plants that were grown in the First World War.
Good grief. So what sort of varieties were growing? I'm just looking down here, squashes and what have you got over there? Brussels sprouts, there's raspberries over here. There's no real trees, so I think everything was quite quick.
It was. They weren't
quick cropping
they
varieties.
Weren't fruit trees or anything like that. It was quick turnaround. Get that sort of food that fills you up and sustains the nation.
Thank you, Mike. Really, really enlightening. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
I visited Brookwood Cemetery with the head of horticulture for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, David Richardson, to discover how plants play their part in preserving the memory of those who fought and died. So David, tell me a little bit about the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and its close association with horticulture.
Sure, well we were established in 1917, so we've been running for over 100 years, and the layout of the cemeteries is very much in a garden style. So you look at Brookwood Military Cemetery where we are today, and it is a cemetery, it's got those identifiable headstones, but it's a really beautiful garden as well.
Yes, but it's not just the large trees and the lawned area. There's plants almost by the side and in front of all the gravestones as well.
Yeah, every stone has got some planting in front of it, and it serves two purposes. It is beautiful, it's a garden style, but the ones at the base of the stones stop the splash when there's rain, so the inscriptions at the base of the stone, and many of the stones have got personal inscriptions chosen by the families. It means that you don't get soil splash on those.
So what's the reaction when people come to the war grave sites for the first time and see that it's not just headstones, it's a beautiful garden too? What do they say?
I mean, I think initially people look at the garden and think it's a beautiful landscape, it's really special, it's tranquil, I mean it's beautifully maintained. But then they walk around and start to look at headstones and look at inscriptions, and I think then the meaning of this garden and the fact that these headstones represented mostly young men that died in the war. It's interesting, we have a site in Italy, in Anzio, where we've got a gardener who's been looking after an individual grave for 40 years. And recently we were able to find a photograph of this young man. And this gardener who'd looked after this individual grave just burst into tears. It was the most moving thing. If you think that, these people died 1942 or First World War, I've got no connection. I think that sentiment and the way that they touch an individual is something that we share, and it's very common.
Well, thank you very much, David. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward, I also sent a crew to meet up with Jock Easton of Help for Heroes to tell us how horticulture is helping service personnel and veterans today cope with the trauma of conflict.
My name's Jock Easton and I'm the recovery manager here in Devonport Naval Base at the Help for Heroes Recovery Centre. We have a garden here that was first established as a market garden back in 1904, and then as the naval base developed around Devonport, the secure fence went up. That then meant the market garden became a garden for the naval base. Help for Heroes came along and I suggested that we take this on as a recovery garden, and we established it from a garden that had failed into now one that produces a means of recovery, produces vegetables for a small market garden, it produces flowers, it's a safe space, it allows veterans and serving personnel to come along, grow their own vegetables and flowers, learn about trees, the environment, work with our bees, and the veterans all do that, and they learn with each other about working and enjoying the garden. I think it plays an important role in individuals' recovery because it allows them to go to places perhaps that they've not thought existed, particularly during their injury, particularly if it's mental health. Mental health has a big impact, as I'm sure everyone is aware nowadays. It's become much more prevalent in community discussion. And this place, this garden, allows those individuals to talk freely with each other and to exchange experiences, exchange opinion, and actually talk about recovery with each other. I can tell you of individuals who were sunk during the Falklands, who have suffered horrendous nightmares, night terrors for some 40 years, and who are only now just stepping up to ask for help. They've passed through the garden. They're not here every day, but they've passed through and they've picked up one of the courses that we've done. And whilst I'm not suggesting they are now professional gardeners, they do recognise that when they can come into the garden, whether it's here or whether it's down in Cornwall, perhaps the Eden Project or Helligan or somewhere that we collaborate with, they can enjoy the space and actually work towards their recovery. I can give you an example of individuals who have had a stroke on operations, who have been shot, who've been blown up, who've had mental breakdowns, who have had all sorts of things that happen in everyday life that you will probably recognise. The garden is one area that slows them right down, takes them back to probably somewhere they've been before that I've just lost sight of, and whether it's picking potatoes, putting the honey in jars, picking the apples, putting them in the boxes to get squeezed into juice, I think that just helps them on their way to a better life. It helps them on their recovery journey.
As I come to the end of my journey looking at how plants and horticulture played a part during the First World War, and also the positive effects of plants and gardens have to our service personnel today as they cope with the traumas of conflict, it's really important to remember those who fought and those who sacrificed their lives for the freedoms we enjoy today.